The Heavenly Demon. Can't Live a Normal Life. By Sanchin. Chapter 285. After the War. Part 1. The soldiers of Luna Kingdom quietly gazed at Isabel, praying under the warm sunlight in an unknown, mysterious place. A sacred scene unfolded before the soldiers. The warm sunlight slowly wrapped around Isabel's body. And as her beautiful blonde hair began to glow, the Queen of Luna manifested her holy power. Isabel was born amidst the chaos when the freezing cold swept the world and Luna was on the brink of destruction. She was called by the gods to protect the kingdom from demolition. Recalling the day the kingdom's people chanted Isabel's name, Leo, the captain of the royal knights, held his ground, standing not too far from his queen. Her prayer finally ended. As her glowing white hair recovered its blonde color, Isabel slowly got up from the ground and walked out of the room. "My queen, why don't you return to Arcadia for now? The gods always ask for your sacrifice as the oracle. However, now that the Kronos Empire declared an armistice, we don't have any reason to remain here," said Leo. "No, I can't do that," Isabel shook her head. After receiving the message from the heavens, she had made up her mind. Alexander used a forbidden magic, level 9 circle magic, to destroy Odelia's capital. In other words, it must mean he is no longer bound to the constraints. That must be why he pushed forward with the war, knowing we would interfere. We're running out of time. The moment they accomplish their objectives by shedding the blood of humanity, we won't be able to stop the darkness from spreading even with the help from the heavens, she continued. The Kronos Empire had hidden its ambitions for a long time. Partially, it was because of Isabel's presence, but the Queen of Luna believed they postponed their grand plan due to some unknown constraints blocking them from fully manifesting their powers. However, from the day the freezing cold worsened, the constraints holding the darkness suddenly grew weak. And the war proved that the Empire was no longer restricted to any boundary. Light and darkness, these two opposite forces coexisted in the world. Thus, as Alexander grew stronger, Isabel also acquired the same strength. But the problem wasn't him but the mysterious being, the source of Alexander's power. Isabel had to prevent his advent. As Leo suggested, there were times Isabel also desired to shut her eyes to the struggles of the world but couldn't because it was her destiny. The queen was reminded of Roman Dmitri as she calmly marched forward. Roman Dmitri was a person not mentioned in the messages from the gods. The young man appeared out of nowhere and made waves across the continent. Not only that, but he also defeated the dark force without the help of the gods. Isabel's life would have been much easier if he had agreed to cooperate and support her. However, Roman made it clear to her that he wouldn't fight for humanity. As a result, Isabel had to go her separate ways since she was a servant of the gods. "I will protect you by your side as the captain of the Royal Knights," said Leo. A path full of struggles awaited Isabel. The continent may have won its peace through the armistice, however, Isabel and her troops' war was far from over. Isabel looked up at Leo, then turned to the soldiers. She felt sorry for making them burden the same sacrifice just because they served her. "I appreciate your service," she said. However, she didn't promise false hope or guarantee a bright future. She could only express gratitude because she knew the path ahead would be bumpy. She didn't want to give false hope to those who had to bear the sacrifices. This was the burden Isabel carried, the life she decided to live. Henderson's pale corpse lay on the hospital bed. As Roman quietly gazed down at his deceased knight, the doctor carefully reported what had happened. "We used the best potions we can acquire every day to cure Henderson and even called the priests to pray for his recovery, but despite our efforts, he showed no signs of recovery. In fact, it was impossible for him to recover from his wounds in the first place. We were able to sustain his life thanks to your power, but unfortunately, Henderson was already in a horrible state when he first arrived here," he said. After the battle, Henderson was brought to the infirmary in a horrific state. Dreadful wounds covered his entire body, and the blood dripping down from them drenched the trails he passed. The doctors believed he wouldn't be able to last more than a week. They were able to barely sustain his life with the expensive potions and their efforts and hoped Henderson would recover through the energy infused by Roman. Unfortunately, that was all they could do for the dying knight. In the end, Henderson never opened his eyes again. Roman's energy was capable of curing the wounded but couldn't revive the dead. We believe the enemy's final attack left lethal damage on his body, eventually leading to his death. According to Fernando, Henderson's sacrifice bought our knights 1 second to counter the enemy. That 1 second was what decided Henderson's tragic fate. He could have survived if he hadn't thrown his body and instead chose to defend against the attack. However, he chose to sacrifice himself to kill the enemy. It was already too late to rescue him the moment he stepped in. "I'm sorry I couldn't cure Henderson for you, my lord." Roman held an indifferent look even while hearing the doctor's words. He calmly gazed down at Henderson's face as the doctor spoke tearfully. 1 second. That 1 second decided Henderson's fate. In other words, Henderson could have always evaded his death if he desired. He still had the chance to save himself when he dropped to the ground gushing with blood after taking Sven's attacks. If he had cared for himself, didn't throw his body for Fernando, and didn't sacrifice his life for that 1 second to defeat Sven, Henderson could have woken up from his deep sleep after receiving Roman's innate energy. However, the knight always devoted his life to what was best for everyone and gladly threw away his body, knowing he would die. Roman quietly spent some time with Henderson alone in the room. He didn't say a single word but solely gazed down at his loyal servant. And after exiting the room, he spoke to Chris, who was waiting for him outside. "Make preparations for the joint memorial ceremony." "Yes, my lord," Chris replied. Roman didn't say a word nor do a thing for Henderson. However, for some reason, Chris noticed a bitterness emitting from Roman's back as he watched the young lord walk away. The memorial ceremony was soon held. Cremation of the dead was a tradition passed down from generations to send off the dead souls. The corpses of the soldiers were burned together before the people of Dimitri. Crackle, crackle. The flames grew stronger. The bodies that were luckily retrieved from the cold battleground were brought back to their families and friends to be cremated before them. The families quietly watched as their loved ones disappeared into the ashes. They swallowed their tears, finding Roman silently gazing at the flames in one corner of the vast field. However, the silence didn't last for long. As soon as one person burst into tears, the sorrowful atmosphere spread. People began to weep, unable to bear the sorrows. There was no joy in the sorrows of losing a loved one. Only despair and heartache existed. A soldier who was a precious man of someone else was forced to sacrifice his life for the national interest, but the sorrow of his death was a burden his family had to bear solely. Roman recalled a memory from his past as he gazed at the fluttering flames. The war in Murim ended soon after the demon of lunacy's death. The war progressed rapidly after the fall of Shalin. And once the 961 clan declared its surrender, the justice factions of Murim lost their momentum to resist the demonic cult. The history of Murim proved that unifying Murim was an impossible mission. The masters of martial artists who existed before Jungheek Bek didn't even come close to unifying the entire Murim. However, those who kneeled below Jungheek Bek's feet proved he was the first to accomplish what was deemed impossible: unification. He conquered all of Murim. And on the day he finally achieved his goal, he recalled a conversation he had with the demon of lunacy. "Are you glad living your life for someone else?" the divine demon asked the demon of lunacy one day. Jungheek Bek accepted to live a life full of struggles. And because he refused to live a life under another authority, the conquest of Murim was a goal that had to be achieved. However, the demon of lunacy was different. The demon, who was nothing but a young boy when he first joined the demonic cult, never had the chance to live his own life, serving under the divine demon. So, Jungheek Bek had to ask the question because he knew he wouldn't be satisfied if he were in the demon of lunacy's shoes. "Don't refer to yourself as someone else, Master. You have meant the world to me since you rescued me from my life's abyss. Everyone has a dream. If your dream is to unite Murim under your rule, my dream is to help you accomplish it. That is why I won't die. I'm going to survive until the very end to witness your dream come true," he replied. It was a contradictory statement. After all, the demon of lunacy, who promised to stand by his side, never hesitated to sacrifice himself to help Jung-Hik Baek achieve his dream. But unfortunately, the dream of world domination was too overwhelming for a young boy. Thus, he eventually faced his death, failing to keep up with Jung-Hik Baek. The demon of lunacy couldn't keep his promise when the divine demon achieved his objective. After conquering Murim, Jung-Hik Baek left the 100,000 mountains to search for the demon of lunacy's family. And he finally came across a person assumed to be his family. "I did have a nephew back in the days, I believe." "Why?" said the man. "The demon of lunacy lost his family when he was still a child. The only family he had left was his uncle living a wasted life, addicted to alcohol and gambling. To be honest, he didn't deserve to be called a family, seeing how he had already forgotten about his nephew. He was a fool who couldn't even recognize Jung-Hik Baek's face. At least, he displayed a servile attitude, bowing before Roman, afraid he could lose his life after reading Jung-Hik Baek's unusual charisma. And to that fool, tap. Here. Take this." Jung-Hik Baek threw a bag full of golden coins. The man looked up at him in shock after finding what was inside. "This is for the child's life," the divine demon said. "Thank you. Thank you so much." The man rejoiced. He laughed as if he had won the world. Not even the slightest sorrow reflected on his face over his nephew's death. His eyes glittered as he stared at the golden coins in the bag. The divine demon knew the demon of lunacy's uncle wouldn't cry over his death. He knew the man would head immediately to the gambling house once he left and waste the money, enjoying his life. Even if he weren't to waste the money, Jung-Hik Baek knew the demon of lunacy would be forgotten as his uncle lived his life in wealth. Nevertheless, he wanted to pay a visit. He didn't have a particular reason. All he wished was to have someone who could remember the demon of lunacy other than himself in this world. So, he went his way after giving him the money. And that marked the opening of the divine demon's era, the reign of Jung-Hik Baek. ****. Several days had passed. However, Roman didn't leave the field, standing before the ashes. Chris approached his young lord with a worried look. "You should go get some rest, my lord. You haven't gotten any proper rest since your journey to Redford. The people of Dimitri will understand your sincerity," he said. "Chris," Roman called. "Yes, Lord Roman. I told you once before that I wish you to take my place as commander during my absence," Roman said, keeping his eyes fixed on the ashes below him. Then, he continued as he gazed at the remnants of his loyal soldiers. "It's inevitable to prevent countless deaths while leading as a commander. Countless lives are lost at my words and my commands. That is what it truly means to live as a commander and a leader. Throughout my life, I've never had the luxury nor the compassion to feel the burdens of my commands. However, not once have I taken the deaths of my men for granted. It doesn't matter if I have to fake this. This is my way of paying homage to my men for their loyal service and deliberate action for their families to see," said Roman. His words were cold, however, Chris strangely sensed a taste of bitterness and sadness in them. A commander can never live an ordinary life. The moment you give yourself up to your emotions, the people following your orders will perceive you as no different from them and will try to develop a more intimate relationship. But perhaps a humane leader is what people want. However, remember this, Chris. If you desire to achieve your objective as commander, you have to choose your words wisely and keep your distance from your subordinates." Roman deliberately drew a line to keep his distance from his people. While genuinely grieving for the deaths of his men, he refused to appear humane before his people. Chris had served Roman from the beginning. The knight had vowed his allegiance to Roman since he was called Dimwit Dimitri. A long time had passed since then, but Chris still felt uncomfortable around him. Roman intentionally kept that distance by thoroughly calculating his words and refusing to crumble the line between him and his subordinates. Roman had lived his life as a predator. He didn't need careful thinking anymore, he instinctively knew what he had to do to become a successful commander. Chris wanted to ask Roman if it wasn't difficult to lead such a life but couldn't dare speak the words out of his mouth. From what he had seen while serving Roman by his side, it seemed Roman was just born that way. Chris, take my advice to heart if you desire to become a commander and a leader in the future. You should never take the deaths of your men lightly, and at the same time, only a clear reward and compensation can make up for the sorrows, Roman added. He seemed resolute. Roman didn't turn his back on the dead. Gather our leadership. We will convene a meeting to discuss compensations for those who had died in the war. Yes, my lord, Chris replied. The people of Dimitri would soon learn what Roman meant by a clear reward. Chapter 286. After the War. Part 2. Chloe, Henderson's wife, gazed down at a picture lying on the desk in front of her with eyes welling up in tears. You're stubborn even after your death, she muttered. Henderson and Chloe were both ordinary commoners of Lawrence. And just like any child born into a farm household, Henderson naturally grew up as a farmer, helping his parents. He lived an ordinary life, no different from others. His marriage with Chloe also fell along the same line. He married her not because he loved her, but to start a family and quickly establish a stable life. So, he met Chloe upon his parents' suggestion. And the two accepted their marriage, just like any commoner. The two gave birth to a son and lived a happy life. And like how water steadily reached its boiling point, their love for each other grew deeper as time passed. There were times when Henderson would talk about an absurd dream of his about how he wanted to become a soldier rather than live a life as a farmer, but Chloe never took his words to heart. And she believed they wouldn't face any trouble as long as the two learned to be satisfied with their lives. However, the conflict between Lawrence and Barco changed their life upside down. And when rumors of conscription began to spread across Lawrence to protect the land from Barco, Henderson also joined the fight, heading out to the streets with his friends and with a garden fork in his hand. Chloe regretted not stopping him then. Perhaps her husband wouldn't have faced such a tragic death if she had dissuaded him back then. But no matter how many times she ruminated about the past, she didn't genuinely believe that Henderson made a wrong choice. You did look genuinely happy, though. She could never forget the smile on Henderson's face when he first passed the recruitment test to join Dimitri's army. And the day her husband returned home for his first military leave, she recognized his change. His somewhat innocent face had turned sharp, and his hands covered with calluses from the farm work were encrusted with new calluses from the training. Henderson didn't stop talking about how happy he was living in Dimitri. His new wage was incomparable with the money he had earned through farming. And though he struggled initially due to his lack of experience, he told Chloe how much he enjoyed training his swordsmanship. Chloe was also glad to see her husband genuinely enjoy his life and smile. The two were happy with their new life. It wasn't easy for Chloe to manage the household alone while her husband was out training in Dimitri and fighting battle. However, Henderson made up for everything whenever he returned home, devoting his time to loving their son and helping her. As Dimitri's reputation grew over time, Henderson gained fame around the villages nearby after contributing to the war against Barco and on the South battlefield. Chloe, I sincerely respect and admire Lord Roman Dimitri. He's a true leader who won't abandon his subordinates, whatever the circumstances. And even if I were to die on the battlefield, he's not someone who will take my death lightly. I want to become stronger for him and my family. These were the last words Henderson left with her. Henderson did become more vigorous, training days and nights while even giving up his time to sleep. However, it was his strength that drove him to his death. Some people said Henderson lived a special and unique life born as a farmer, and Chloe wept when Duke Dimitri personally came to her house to express his condolences. The only picture she had with her husband was lying on the desk. In the photo, Henderson brightly hugged their son in his sturdy arm while Chloe hugged the other. Not many commoners could afford to take a magic photo, but Henderson first chose to do it with his family when he returned home with his reward after a battle. Chloe was filled with regrets. If she had known her husband would suddenly leave her side, she would have taken more pictures to remember him. At that moment. Knock knock. Chloe, are you there? A familiar voice echoed from outside. After putting her son to bed, Chloe came out and opened the door to find Chris waiting for her. An awkward atmosphere overshadowed the room. Chris, known for being a cool head and impassive among the Dimitri soldiers, awkwardly took a sip from the teacup sitting across from Chloe. He had met her before a couple of times with Henderson. However, with Henderson dead, Chris felt uneasy meeting Chloe alone. The knight carefully looked around the room. Traces of Henderson could be found throughout. Though the memorial ceremony had ended, it appeared Chloe wasn't prepared to let her husband go just yet. Clink. After putting the teacup on the table, he carefully spoke up in a calm voice. Henderson was a good friend. He was like the linchpin of the Dimitri army that kept our soldiers and knights together. If it weren't for his sacrifice on the day of the invasion, many more lives would have been lost. We can never take his death for granted, but I just wanted to tell you how valuable his sacrifice was for us and the legacy he has left behind for us, he said. Is that so? Chloe smiled. She was being thoughtful. She knew what she had to do to help ease Chris's uneasy heart. In fact, I came to see you to tell you that Dimitri plans to grant Henderson a Legion of Merit. A Legion of Merit. It wasn't a word Chloe was familiar with. She was able to assume what the word meant, literary, but never heard such an award or system existed on Salamander. Yes. A Legion of Merit is an award the leadership established in the recent meeting. It is a national decoration awarded to those who have devoted exceptionally meritorious conduct for Dimitri. The state promises to care for their families for the rest of their lives and provide appropriate compensation. Henderson was a brave friend. What he has done deserves all the praise, Chris explained. Chloe was perplexed at Chris's words. She desperately tried to keep her smile but couldn't after hearing what Chris said. Her eyes began to well up. It wasn't because of the compensation but because she was thankful for Dimitri's sincerity. She was deeply moved by how the dukedom didn't take her husband's death lightly and tried its best to remember the legacy he left behind by recognizing his meritorious service. Henderson was right. Roman Dimitri was indeed a leader worth serving. Roman didn't neglect the families who had lost their loved ones. Chloe lowered her head as tears endlessly dropped from her eyes. She couldn't look at Chris in the eyes. We can only alleviate the people's sorrows by not taking their sacrifices for granted and promising clear compensation. Chris recalled what Roman said to the leaders of Dimitri in the heated discussion about war compensation and death gratuity. Are you sure about this? Viscount Conrad couldn't believe his ears. Roman's words left the Viscount and all the leaders in the room stunned. Death gratuity. Don't get me wrong. It's not that we disagree with you, but you're suggesting we acquire a budget of 1 million gold just for death gratuity for those who died during the war. Not even Dimitri can easily afford that much money. Why don't we reduce it by half? We can discuss with Cairo Kingdom and use the war reparations we gained from Kronos for death gratuity. That's more practical, in my opinion, the Viscount suggested. Everyone in the room nodded their heads in agreement. They felt nauseous just by hearing the amount Roman was willing to pay for those who died in action, 1 million gold. Considering how Redford Kingdom almost went bankrupt for only 100,000 gold, it was an immense amount not even Dimitri could easily afford. The leaders in the room knew Dimitri could also go bankrupt after paying such an amount. The leaders who would have customarily concurred with Roman's opinion had to raise their voices against him this time. I agree with you, Viscount Conrad. 1 million gold is a large amount of money even for Dimitri, but that is what makes this death gratuity even more meaningful. Kronos paid 500,000 gold for war reparations. What do you think the people will think if we offer the exact same amount as compensation for the death of their loved ones? Asked Roman. They'll be grateful. The Viscount replied. Well, they will feel grateful for the compensation, but they'll inevitably begin to link the compensation to the war's outcome. If we offer only 500,000 gold, they'll know nothing is coming out of our pockets. But that isn't what I want the people to think. I want to give them firm confidence that Dimitri will reward whoever makes contributions and devotes themselves to the future of this land, Roman continued. Roman intentionally asked Kronos to pay 500,000 gold to reach an agreement for a truce. Indeed, it was an amount far too large for Baron Charlton to agree. However, Roman knew the money was only a drop in the bucket for the empire. He had requested the precise amount to use for compensation to reward the dead. He intended to use all of the war reparations gained from Kronos to give to the families of the dead soldiers. Thus, 500,000 gold seemed appropriate to engage his plan. After all, the war reparations Kronos paid carried more symbolic significance than the money itself. Dmitri had already achieved its purpose through the war by receiving the war reparations as a condition for an armistice. The death gratuity is only the beginning. Dmitri will implement a system to commend the meritorious service of our men. We will provide the necessary payment for those who have lost their lives, but most importantly, we will reward those like Henderson who have contributed greatly to our kingdom and remember their legacies. It's not to differentiate one from the others but to show our people that they will be rewarded appropriately based on their contributions. I've already discussed this matter with Cairo, and the kingdom gladly accepted my proposal to use the 500,000 gold to reward the dead. It also expressed its will to pitch in to acquire the remaining 500,000, stated Roman. The room grew silent. No one could dare rebut Roman's words because they also dreamed of establishing a kingdom that remembered the sacrifices and devotions of its people. The leader no longer had any reason to oppose Roman, knowing they could also end up like Henderson someday. We've lost a lot of things from this war. In particular, Dmitri will be financially strapped for some time after cutting our trades with Kronos. However, it's essential for us to show the people of Dmitri that our greatest sorrow right now is the loss of our loved ones. I'm not here to convince you to build some utopian kingdom that prioritizes the safety and wellness of our people. But you must remember that the strength of a powerful kingdom doesn't come from a formidable army but from the commoners, the very foundation. If the people of Dmitri truly desire a resurgence of this very kingdom, the brief struggle will soon be solved, and Dmitri will head toward a new and bright future, he continued. Roman's confident voice resounded across the conference room. The young Dmitri, once the divine demon in his previous life, didn't doubt his decision. He knew from experience that his method and mindset would lead Dmitri toward development, just like how he reigned in peace in Murim. We are victors of the war. We shouldn't neglect those lost in sorrow and help them enjoy the triumph as much as everyone else. My priority from today will be looking after the people's livelihood and governing them, Roman concluded. Yes, Lord Roman. Yes, Lord Roman. Everyone raised their voices. Even Viscount Conrad, who initially questioned Roman's decision, passionately raised his voice and promised to follow Roman's command. After Chris left, Chloe was alone in her room, weeping in tears. Legion of Merit. Henderson. In her hands was a small medal. She couldn't stop her tears from falling, graceful that Dmitri remembered her husband and that the dukedom didn't neglect the families of the bereaved. It was true she resented Roman Dmitri for a brief second when she was first informed about Henderson's death, but now she was thankful he had sacrificed his life not for another kingdom but for Dmitri. The life of a commoner was bitter and harsh. There was nothing such as compensation for those who were conscripted for war. Their sacrifices were in vain. Thus, it was only natural for the families to weep as if they had lost the world whenever the landlords waged war and forced conscription. The probability of their loved ones returning home safe and sound was close to nil. Most returned home either dead or without a limb or two. But the ones who waged war and enforced compulsory enrollment were busy either celebrating their victory parties after a victory or raising the taxes after a loss. Sob sob. Tears wouldn't stop dripping from her eyes. Even Dimitri's compensation couldn't relieve her sorrow for losing Henderson. Nothing could free her from the despair, but at least she was saved from her resentment. After sitting in her room and shedding tears, she belatedly gazed at the box Chris left behind. This is another reward we are offering for those of meritorious service. Please take a look later when you feel better, Chris said before he left. The word compensation was a word filled with sadness. However, Chloe had no choice but to accept her bitter reality. The reality was that she was now a widow who had lost her loving husband. She reached out her hand and opened the box. She gasped in shock as soon as she found what was inside. Inside the box was a pile of glittering golden coins, a sight commoners like herself would never get a chance to see in a lifetime. Chapter 287. After the War. Part 3. Chris was lost in his thoughts as he was returning to Dimitri after meeting Chloe. Would I be able to make the sacrifice like Henderson, he muttered. Chris had to ask the question to himself. Sven, the shadow that attacked Dimitri, was a level 6 or a knight. And unlike others who pledged their loyalty to Roman based on blind trust, Chris chose to follow Roman to become stronger, not because he trusted him at first. The basis of his loyalty was different from most of the others. It was only natural for him to doubt he would be able to do the same as Henderson if he were in the knight's shoes, fighting against a level 6 or a knight. He knew he would have hesitated to throw his body to take the enemy's deadly attack to buy Fernando's chance to counter. His loyalty built upon rivalry couldn't promise unconditional devotion and sacrifice in such a dire situation, even to himself. But for some reason... Chloe. Chris whispered in his mind as he boldly marched forward. He couldn't stop himself from pondering over the tears shed by Chloe. The sound of her weeping behind the door as he left the house continued to linger in his mind. There was nothing unusual about families crying over the loss of their loved ones. Chris had encountered such experiences countless times as a knight, however, the tears Chloe wept were a bit more complex than the ones he had faced. Her cries reflected her sorrows of losing Henderson and her gratitude to Roman Dimitri for remembering her husband. Commoners like Chloe and Chris felt their hearts crumble just by the fact that someone as significant as Roman treated them as equal human beings. Chris felt a lump in his throat as he pondered Henderson's death and his wife. Chris was an orphan. And because he grew up without parents but under Captain Jonathan's care, he never truly understood what it meant to have a family like Henderson and care for one. But at least he could imagine a future of himself becoming a father just like Henderson and having his own family. And if that time were ever to come, perhaps he would end up like others, blindly following Roman, knowing he would protect his family rather than focus on surpassing the young lord. Chris couldn't help but simper. Roman had clearly told him that every part of his plan was intentional, yet he couldn't stop Chloe's emotions from breaking into his heart. Lord Roman, you were right. A commander's word could force countless lives to be lost. But now, I have learned what you can achieve by keeping an attitude of not taking the deaths of your men for granted and providing their families with clear compensation, regardless of your genuineness. Perhaps it is because I saw Chloe in person. I may also willingly sacrifice my life if I ever were to be placed in Henderson's shoes in the future for the sake of Roman Dimitri, a leader the people truly admire and a man I sincerely honor. Chris had a change of heart. The young knight, who was deeply enraged after his loss against Roman Dimitri in the past, matured after admitting his defeat and vowing his loyalty to Roman. And now he genuinely admired and respected his young lord. And if he were ever to become a leader in the future, he wanted to be like Roman. A sudden voice called for him as Chris slowly walked away from Henderson's house. Sir Chris. It was Chloe. She came rushing out of the house with a stunned face. I think you brought the wrong box. It appeared at least several hundred golds were in that box just by a glance. It's too heavy for me to carry out alone, so could you please take it back yourself? You'll get yourself in trouble for making such a mistake, she said. As she mentioned, the box had 300 gold. It was an amount enough to feed a 4-person family for at least 300 years, which was why Chloe hurriedly rushed out of the house in shock after finding what was inside the box. It was too much to be taken as a reward and compensation for Henderson's death. 300 was just too much for a mere commoner's death, no matter how much he had devoted. It wasn't a mistake, said Chris. Huh. Chloe replied. Lord Roman said it himself that you, Chloe, will need the money to live an abundant life and as a proud mother for your son. For what Henderson has done for us, you deserve the reward. And Chloe, I promise you that this won't be the last of the compensations and rewards you will receive for Henderson's outstanding meritorious service. The box of gold marks the beginning. You will see for yourself how Dimitri treats its people who have devoted their lives to the dukedom. including financial aid and educational support for your child, he explained. Chris smiled as he briefly paused. In a corner of his heart, he felt proud that he could relay the words to Chloe on behalf of Roman. I wish you all the best and a happy future ahead, he said, leaving. Howman decided to sit on its hands over the incident. The information guild that would have normally engaged in operations to help spread positive words about Roman received a specific order from Roman not to engage in any activities affiliated with the deaths of the soldiers and use it for political use. Lucas took Roman's words to heart and ordered his men to do nothing. While understanding Roman's intention, the leader of the information guild already knew things would get wild even if his guild didn't do a thing. And as expected, the reward policy shocked Dmitri a few days later. At first, the people doubted the rumors regarding the compensation, but they were perplexed once they saw people like Chloe receive monetary settlements from the government. The financial compensation Dmitri provided wasn't a couple of silvers. Though the rewards were distributed based on the services, the people couldn't believe Dmitri was giving out actual gold to compensate the families of the dead. I can't believe it. Did you hear? Apparently, Dmitri created a budget of 1 million gold just for compensation and death gratuity. Are you serious? But I heard Dmitri won 500,000 gold for war reparations from the Kronos Empire. So you're saying that Dmitri added another 500,000 to treat those who have contributed to this war properly? That's impossible. Not even Dmitri should be able to afford that much money with its flourishing iron industry. We're not talking about 10,000 or 100,000 gold here. It's 1 million. The people in the kingdoms went crazy. The citizens who first doubted Dmitri acquired the inconceivable amount of gold had no choice but to believe it as they witnessed people receive the compensation as days passed. Their neighbors next door, across their houses, and their close friends confirmed the truth. The people of the kingdoms grew to admire Dmitri's bold decision. They were also informed about the soldiers who received the Legion of Merit, recognized for their exceptional meritorious services. A government system that will care for the families of those who have devoted their lives to the dukedom. I always knew Lord Roman Dmitri had never forgotten those who devoted their lives to Dmitri, but I didn't expect him to go this far for them. I've never heard of such a system on this continent. Even the mighty Kronos Empire that praises itself as the best on the continent doesn't offer such a treatment for its veterans and soldiers who have sacrificed their lives for the empire. Did you hear about what happened to Chloe? Dmitri not only awarded Henderson with the Legion of Merit but also offered 300 gold, recognizing his service to the kingdom. It shows that the system isn't just words but an actual thing. Compensation couldn't relieve the sorrows of the families completely. However, it was enough to ensure the future of their lives, allowing people like Chloe, who had lost their heads of household, to continue their lives. The news stirred the kingdoms. Some wept in sadness, while some praised Roman Dmitri. Some even packed their belonging, choosing to join Dmitri. The most noticeable phenomenon was how young farmers who had devoted their lives to agriculture in the small village of Dmitri suddenly left their hometown with a shabby wooden sword in their hands. Father, I'm going to sign up to join the Dmitri army. Henderson was a farmer just like me. He didn't know how to hold a sword and trembled in fear during the recruitment test but was born anew as a formidable knight under Lord Roman's guidance. There's no saying I can't do the same. I will train as hard as I can and become like Henderson. Mother, I promise not to disappoint you. I will become successful. Henderson became a perfect example for commoners like them to follow. The young farmers dreamed of becoming the second and the third Henderson as they left home to Dmitri. In the later days, people remembered the incident as the Henderson syndrome. Meanwhile, meetings were being held throughout the continent in each kingdom. Hector Kingdom. The dukedom of Dmitri estimates up to 1 million gold for war compensation, father. It shows how much Dmitri cares for its people. But don't be fooled that Roman Dmitri is a benevolent leader. Odelia Kingdom was the only kingdom of the coalition that betrayed Dmitri, and as a result, Roman Dmitri didn't do a thing as the empire obliterated its capital. This clearly shows how Dmitri treats its allies from those who aren't. If Hector refuses to live under the same sky as Kronos, "We must side with Dmitri and cooperate with them," said Edwin to the king of Hector. Edwin recalled what Roman had said during the previous summit. He had made it clear that he wouldn't seek a future with those who refused to follow him. The king nodded his head in consent. Though he was the king, his son, Edwin Hector, held authority. So, he put his trust in his son and what Roman Dmitri had accomplished until now. "All right. Starting today, Hector will also make preparations to wage war against Kronos," the king replied. Redford Kingdom. The meeting held in Redford couldn't be called a meeting because its king unilaterally informed his court of his decision without asking for their input. The Kingdom of Redford owes a great deal of gratitude to Roman Dmitri. Without his help, the kingdom would have already been demolished, and our people would be in the streets as refugees, just like the people of Odelia. So remember, we will follow Dmitri regardless of what awaits us at the end of this road. We will repay our debt and hold our swords high when Dmitri seeks our support. For Redford. Hail Dmitri. Cairo Kingdom. Umberto Kingdom. Frank Kingdom. Other kingdoms were not much different from the former two. Cairo Kingdom was already on the same boat as Dmitri since the beginning, and House Drake, who now led Umberto Kingdom, vowed to support Dmitri in the war. The only kingdom that faced division was Frank. Some opposed supporting Dmitri, afraid they would end up like Odelia. Nonetheless, Frank Kingdom chose to side with Dmitri in the end. Kronos and Dmitri. Unlike Kronos betraying allies, Dmitri proved its loyalty by repaying those loyal to the dukedom. The compensation policy didn't only win the hearts of the people. It served as a trigger to gain the hearts of the kingdoms hesitant to support Dmitri and laid the foundation for a new and stable coalition. The dynamics on the continent were swiftly changing. The First World War. Kronos faced its first defeat, while Valhalla continued to remain a bystander. And Odelia existed no more. The former coalition of the kingdoms was born anew, centered around Dmitri. Time steadily passed. 2 weeks later, a notice decorated the walls of Dmitri. Dmitri welcomes new recruits to the armed forces. It was like how things turned out a few years before when Roman Dmitri prepared to head to the south battlefield, openly recruiting soldiers who would serve him and him only. Dmitri was no longer a small land. It had countless soldiers already serving in its dukedom as the state grew larger in size. However, Roman's personal army was a group of specialized units that carried out his private commands. And there was one condition that stood out in this year's recruitment. Eligible candidates are strictly limited to people who aren't citizens of the dukedom. But those already Dmitri's armed forces members may join Lord Roman's army by passing the recruitment test. The notice stirred the hearts of many young men in Dmitri. After all, a horde of youth was already signing up to join the army from the Henderson syndrome. The recruitment poster of Roman's private army ignited the passion inside the young hearts. Joining Lord Roman Dmitri's army means something else. Kevin, Vulcan, Pucky, and all of the knights were average commoners when they first joined. But look at them now, they have become formidable knights after receiving Lord Roman's teachings. You would be a fool not to join if you are a citizen of Dmitri and have dreamed of becoming a knight at least once in your life. I expect soldiers already serving in the army will also apply, thus, there'll be a wave of people trying out this time, said one man. 10,000? 20,000? People couldn't dare fathom how many people would apply this time. But their predictions couldn't go beyond the common sense. Most believed that only the citizens of Dmitri would apply for the recruitment. But once the word spread out, the news of the recruitment went beyond Dmitri, grabbing the attention of everyone on Salamander.